I say to them is the most predictable thing about social media is that it's unpredictable and people don't want to be sold to, period.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Lindsay DeLong, the founder of Equip Me OT. Paul and Lindsay explore healthcare content strategies, including engagement and vanity metrics, the importance of distribution, and the power of content and its ability to compound over time. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
It's the issue of I have something to offer the world. I have a product, physical or digital. I have a service I can provide. I have a skill set I can provide, but nobody's listening. And how do I reach them? And more specifically, how do I reach them while taking advantage of the great opportunity that social media is? And what I've learned over time is that it seems that people think there's some sort of trick. There's some sort of algorithmic magic that you can kind of turn on and make things work, but that's not what I'm finding to be the case. And there's some really important pieces of like how you present information about something that changes the way people see you and therefore see what you offer. They have to see you first though, and I think that's where people in social media get really like, oh, I don't want to have to show myself. And you have to be ready to show yourself. That's really difficult to convince some folks to do.
Yeah. Well, okay. There is so much to unpack there. And so we're going to try. First of all, I love this topic because I think nobody, okay, well, actually, let me just kind of dive into a couple of things. First is, it's funny we're talking about this because just 2 or 3 days ago, so I've got a text chain with a bunch of other dads that I went to college with, right? So it's like 90% memes, maybe like 5% pictures of our kids, and then maybe 3% like real conversations. And so one of the conversations that came up the other day was like, man, I hit the not interested button on my Instagram feed. One of the guys was like, yeah, I keep getting all this stuff in my feed. I keep saying not interested or whatever. And, I responded back with, in quotes, I did, it's all a conspiracy. And then it was signed off as like non-technical people. And then the next part that I wrote was like, the algorithms just show you more of what you dwell on. And maybe you should just take a look at what you're dwelling on. Like when you're,
Yep.
and when I say dwell, like, it's like when you're scrolling through the feed, it's not exactly right. Like it's, engagement isn't just a like button or a heart or a share or whatever. Those are definitely parts of the signals, but it's also where you stop scrolling on the screen and what you're watching. Even for like milliseconds, it might not seem like a lot, but that's where the algorithms are going. So that's, that's the little nerd thing. I just thought it was interesting that you bring this up, considering this came up in my text chains the other day. But it comes back to this idea of content. Everybody wants to go viral. So it's like most people don't want to put their face on something.
Nope.
We'll talk about that. But then the few people that are thinking about creating content, then they immediately think like, how do I go viral? What does that even mean? And I think that's really, it's alarmingly simple. It's like, can you really strike a chord of a conversation that maybe people are already having in private, but maybe not willing to have publicly?
And it's the problem. Do you actually understand the problem? Because most people feel that they have a very strong solution, right? You don't go through the process of creating a business or a product or any sort of, offering to the world without thinking you're solving some major problem. But
Right.
the real problem is, do you actually understand it? And the thing that I find social media to be so awesome at is it'll tell you very quickly if you understand the problem, because they're going to tell you either by not paying any attention to what you're saying or responding harshly or responding positively. You get that feedback instantly. And if you pay attention to that feedback and act on it,
Yeah.
you can get better.
Well, this is such an interesting conversation because to your point, like I remember a long time ago, something somebody said to me on this topic was this guy happened to be near a whiteboard, And the conversation was like, we were talking about how do we know if our content's working? This is maybe 10, 15 years ago when Twitter was just taking off. This is like before TikTok and all that stuff. So we were talking and we are like, oh, how do we know it's going to work or not? How do we know like people like it or not? And I remember this guy, he was standing there. He's actually one of my business partners now, but he drew 2 dots on the whiteboard and he wrote the word love on one and hate on the other. And he said, what does the line like this between these 2 points look like? And I was like, Dave, that's the dumbest question in the world. It's just a straight line. I mean, what are we talking about here? You know? And he actually then drew like a trough. So he connected them with a trough. And he drew a little arrow to the bottom of the trough and he said, this is the zone of indifference. And I was like, what does that mean? What are you talking about? And he's like, uh, do you ever like when you think about somebody you um love or you hate, they're over here on either point, but everybody else you've forgotten about. You pay no attention to them, no mental cycles to them or whatever. And he said, you'll know it's working. Not just you'll know when it's really working because you either have the trolls or the people that love you come out. You're always going to have both. But he said, you also the part that nobody talks about. He says, if something's not working, if you're not getting engagement, you just have to admit that you're in the zone of indifference. Nobody cares. The algorithms aren't going to deliver that. Nobody's going to deliver that. It's just not going to go anywhere. And then I remember I was like, where are we going with this? And he goes, Paul, ultimately you have to take responsibility for not being interesting. And it was just like kind of a shocking thing to hear. This is years ago. Like it was such a shocking thing to hear because I guess in my mental model, I'll just hopefully maybe I represent some subset of the population. In my mental model, I guess I was taught that being polite means you pay attention to people, I guess. But then you realize like, as you know, as you grow up, you don't really do that. Like some people, and so I don't know. It's kind of like a rambly way of saying like, I think you're right. I don't think enough people talk about this. And especially in the healthcare world where you have people that spent so much time getting educated in sort of like what I call no fail kind of missions, where it's kind of like, hey, if you do this wrong, you could hurt somebody, and so you're trained like that. But the problem is the media mindset requires an iterative mindset where it's like, let's try a bunch of stuff, we'll figure out what works, we'll do more of that, we'll cut the rest, and then you do it over and over. It's like an iterative mindset.
Very different. It's a very different place. And I fell into that where I was so cautious about do no harm that I was fearful of stepping out of what were the traditional comfort zones of an occupational therapist.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started testing the waters with things that were a little bodacious, a little wild, a little weird looking that I had never seen or touched or worked with, and started showing the world that stuff that people were like, oh, what the heck is, and that's where
What's
the
an
eyeballs
example of
started.
that, by the way? When you say like just what you were talking about, you tried new things. Like what's an example in hindsight of that?
Well, so one of the things I was so focused on was like, I knew the questions people were asking over and over again. And so initially I focused on answering those questions, which was good, but not great. That was good for creating some useful content for those folks, but it wasn't moving the needle as far as getting more eyeballs drawn in because those questions, everyone was asking them, like you say, they were sitting kind of in a zone of indifference. They were useful to a few people. So what I started doing was finding things that looked like, for example, there's this cane variety that came out on the market that had this extra handle on it that you could flip down. So if you were sitting down, you had a low spot to grab and a high spot to grab. And I was like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever, what the heck I'm ordering it. So I ordered it thinking I would hate it, being like, this is so stupid. Why does anyone need this? And immediately was like, I don't know that I'm getting the whole picture here. So I put it through the paces. I put it on the floor. I'm testing it out. I get my grandma involved. I'm like, Grandma, what do you think of this? Getting feedback. And I realize I need to just show the world this and just see what they think. And it was exactly what I expected in the sense that you got that. I got the, I hate this, that's useless. And then I got the, I totally see why this exists. And because I peaked those two sides and I wasn't stuck in the trough, that video took off because it started a conversation. And I didn't feed anybody my opinion of it. At no point did I say, I love this. I just said, this exists and it has this, and this was the thought process behind it. What do you think?
Yeah.
And boom. It triggered that reaction for people to have either a positive or a negative or something in between. And it started a conversation. And that was really products like that are been my bread and butter of getting the algorithm to understand me as a point of interest.
Is it fair to say, and you can totally like shoot me down on this. Is it fair to say that, so I forget what that product was called, but like so let's call that one a win, right? You
Yeah,
tried something new and it was a win. And a win being defined as it triggered a response from an audience, people started looking at it and all that. Is it fair to say that like for every win you've had like that there's probably 5 fails,
5 to
10
10.
fails?
5
Yeah.
to 10. We in our house, my husband and I call them, we have our bunts where it's just like, I just had to get a video out because consistency does matter and not everything's going to be a home run. We've got our singles, we've got our doubles, we have the range and you're not going to hit a grand slam on every single post. Sometimes you'll get surprise grand slams that you didn't see coming. And other times you'll have videos that you thought I've had products where I was like, this is such a bizarre. This is going to get so many eyeballs, so much interest, and just
It's just
radio
flat. Yeah,
silence.
it's
Could be the
flat.
timing, could be that it just was only interesting to me. But you have to keep getting up to bat. Every so often, you have to keep going up to bat. And so I think that, that combination of mindset has really helped me to understand how to make social media work as a major marketing tool. And then
Yeah,
also treat
yeah,
my audience with respect in a way of saying, you guys and your opinions of these things that I'm sharing with you matter to me. I'm not just a pro out here telling you what you should know. I'm out here showing you because I want your feedback. Come to
right,
me, talk to me. And
right.
that has spurred on a great deal of really high value followers.
It's interesting as we like put these topics together. So if the first maybe thought is that people need to think iteratively about content creation, maybe the second part is that there's this power law distribution. It's not the normal distribution, meaning like it's not like the normal distribution in this context would be I published 20 pieces per week and like the standard bell curve, the normal distribution would suggest that the middle 80% of those posts will then crush it. That's not how this works. So the second thing you got to almost think about is this idea that the content world is driven by the power law distribution, that most of your content is going to be, yeah, it is what it is. It's there. But then every once in a while, a couple take off, and you almost, I mean, Mr. Beast probably knows which ones are going to do it because he's got a whole process to figure it out, right? But you and me, like, we have no idea what's going to hit. But when it hits,
And then you ride
um,
it. And then
yeah, and
you,
you just, and then you try to make some assumptions about what caused it.
yep.
Was it the delivery? Was it the product? Who knows, right?
Yeah. Make note and try to replicate.
Yeah, like this power. Yeah, maybe that's the second thing. But I didn't mean to cut you off there. By the way,
No, you're okay.
you were saying something there.
I think that there's a really interesting thing that you just said about the predictability of it, because I do think there is some feeling out there, and I get this conversation a lot with business owners who are like, so what's the tip? What's the trick? How do you predict and I have this problem with brands, big brands that reach out to me and want me to make content for them, and they want me to make marketing content for them. And my one thing I say to them is the most predictable thing about social media is that it's unpredictable and people don't want to be sold to, period. My content is really, when you look at it, is just a big fat marketing channel. And I hate that. Like, I had no interest in creating that, but ultimately I share products with a link that you can go buy. I make money when you buy products through that link. So ultimately, for myself, for a business, I'm selling to you every single time. But the secret is it can't feel like that.
That's right.
And brands suck at that. They're like, we need you to mention this tagline and this thing and this thing. It's like, please stop.
They got to check the boxes. Yeah.
If you're a brand listening to this and you want to use an influencer to help promote your brand, let the influencer do it. That's been driving me bonkers lately, is how many brands will reach out to me and be like, here's how we want you to make the content. I'm like, I've been doing this for 6 years. I think I get it, how to do this with my audience who I know. And they don't care. They just are like, we'll pay you if you put these words into this video. And I'm like, fine, it's going to get 20,000 views and languish, but that's okay.
It's funny. I don't want to make this go a hard left turn, but I've actually got a tab over here open on this other screen of a draft idea that I've been just writing down. And it's this like kind of half baked idea that what we think about in terms of PR or public relations is probably poised for a reset this year. And what I mean by that is that traditionally PR has always been like go pitch to the New York Times or the local newspaper. Like like the mental model people have is that's what it's about. But if you kind of like flip it the other way, you said something that kind of triggered this thought for me just a moment ago. You said, people don't want to be sold to. But then even if we like connect the dots back to the earlier conversation, when we think about algorithms, like the Google search algorithm, why does Chat GPT refer some websites over other websites? Ultimately, it comes back to this like intangible but very important topic called influence. And so when you think about it, it's like I think traditional brand marketers have always thought about all this from the PR angle. Okay, what's our tagline? Did you say it? Did you hold it for 37? Did you hold the product for 37 seconds in front of you? It can't be behind you. It's got to be in front of you, um, and they're not wrong for the media channels of the past.
Yep.
But when we think about like how people make purchasing decisions today, whether it's about a cane or a piece of software or even a car, it's not the brand awareness that drives it. It's actually the influencers. So as I think about this weird half articulate post that I've been putting together is this idea that PR is due for a reset, and it's going to be the PR tactics of the past, but towards influencers. How do you go talk to the influencers in a particular industry? But you can't let the brand drive it. It's got to be about like the product and all that stuff.
And I think QVC, working with QVC was actually a really kind of an awakening for me of where they have skillfully and, extremely successfully combined those two things. So you've got this high level production that is obviously selling. That's the
Yep.
whole channel. You sit there and watch people sell you, but people will sit there as loyal customers and just enjoy the journey of listening to people talk passionately about a product. And it's the way they talk about it. They call it the over the fence conversation. You and your neighbor just getting excited about something that exists in the world that they think the other person should know about. That's their approach. When you go through training, that's the approach. And hearing that and going through that training process really awakened me to the fact that that's how influencer marketing should be. It should be, I'm just your friend here. I'm just your neighbor who wants you to know about this thing or this product or this service. And I want you to know because I care about you.
Right.
That's the feeling that you have to try to get out in that marketing space. And QVC's does a really good job of it. That was a real amazing opportunity to learn from them.
What do you say to somebody? So, you were talking about the most common question that you get, and then now, and so what got us down this path. So, like, can you share? I know the answer is really going to be it depends, right? But like let's unpack the question. If the questions that you're getting the most often is, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a practice," or "Hey, I'm whatever." How do I market? Like obviously the answer is it depends, and that's the longer conversation. But if I forced you to kind of like try to answer it, what do you tell people like that? What does that look like?
I think I start with and this is the classic statement that I got when I first started too, which is who's your audience? Who's your ideal customer? Who is that person, that avatar, that you read in all the business books, all the marketing books, that truly does help to shape your initial steps forward. When I started, I realized that my avatar was a variety. There wasn't a single person I was selling to. It was caregivers. It was the patient, the end user. It was also the therapist that I needed to build awareness of. So I realized that I needed to cast a very wide net. That's why my content is intentionally vague. That's why my content is intentionally kind of guerrilla style. I want it to feel like you're not feeling super like I knew that therapists were going to need one thing and a caregiver was going to need another. So I was like, I'm going to cast a really wide net. We're not going for specificity here.
Yeah.
Versus if I was doing something like a clinic or a practice and I was doing a pediatric practice and I wanted to direct my marketing efforts to parents of children with, disabilities, I'm going to make content that's a far more niched down, specific, value laden content for that population. And I'm going to spend time really honing and building that. And my audience, my max audience for that may be 20,000 followers. And that's perfect for that niche because you don't want a million followers in that because you're going to get so many people who are just not even remotely valuable for your business. Versus what I needed, I knew cast a big net, I needed 250,000 plus if I wanted to really make a go of getting products to all these types of people. So first things first, you got to know who that end audience is that you're shooting for. Because if you're just shooting randomly at like whoever's listening, it's too hard. It's too hard to get valuable followers.
Yeah. You bring up a really interesting point there too that we should probably highlight, which is that not every follower is equal. In other words, there is a vanity metric. Like if you compare yourself, I'm going to make this up, but you compare yourself to like Kim Kardashian's social feeds or media numbers, you're never going to be happy. But that's a
Yep.
totally different customer demographic, totally different, goal. But so like one of the things we say on the investing side of my other businesses, we say like the niches get all the riches. And so like, I always tell people that if you can look yourself in the eye and convincingly say that there are at least 10,000 people within a specific profile that you could go after, I think you'll make $1 million.
You will.
Pick a number, but like you'll
Yeah.
make enough to be happy.
I completely agree. And you shouldn't be chasing. That's the thing too, is people get really, they're like, look at the size of your audience. I'm like, the numbers mean almost nothing to me. What I'm most proud of are the engaged followers who are in my DMs every day, who
Right.
are actively responding to my inquiries with my polls. And,
Yeah.
those folks, and those are the ones you want to foster and build around. And those are the ones when they ask a question, I make a content piece about their question.
One of my nephews is pretty young, like barely in high school kind of thing. And then we were having this conversation over the holidays of like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up kind of thing. And of course it's like, I want to be a gamer or a streamer. I had to look this up. I was like, what are we talking about? And I was like, so people watch other people play video games? Like, that's insane. When I was growing up, it's just that there were only 2 controllers and you had 3 friends. So now you had to, that's it. That's the extent, which by the way, he had no idea. That just went over his head. But, and then somehow the conversation, whatever. I ended up saying to him, we were having this conversation about followers. He's like, yeah, like I want to have like 1 billion followers or something. And I was like, look, would you rather have 20 people that pay you $100 a month or 50 million followers that pay you nothing?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because he had never thought about it that way. He's like, well, of course I'd want the smaller number if they're paying me. And I was like, okay, so like, there's a lot of context missing from this example, but I just share it because that idea of like followers too is,
Yeah.
um, it's the thing about marketing, by the way, too, is that people don't understand. Okay, I'm trying to like filter myself. I don't know why, but let's just kind of call it like let's just say it. You know, most practice owners that I know that have failed, even though they won't admit it, I think that when I look at their business from the outside, what seems to have happened is they followed all the rules. They set up the space, they filed for the business licenses, they got the business cards, and if they were getting insurance, they got credentialed. They checked all the boxes, and then like on day one, they open the door and nobody comes. And what you find is that distribution is more important than the product. In other words, don't get me wrong, like the product's got to work. You got to deliver a good service. You got to do that. That's just table stakes. But ultimately, these are highly competitive markets, and the people that think about distribution, and that's another word for marketing,
Yes.
they tend to win. Like, in other words, the best products don't win. It's
Nope.
the best marketed products that win.
100%. And I did not know that. As a therapist, that's not something that's ever mentioned. And I think that that has been one of the single most valuable like light bulb moments for me is distribution and marketing are problem number 1. Problem number 2 is the solution to the problem is the actual thing that you're offering to the world. Because if you can't, I have somebody right now who has a great product, has a great idea, has no plan for how that product is going to reach anyone. And they just think because the product is good and smart that they will be successful with it. And I'm like, I love your positive outlook, but I have terrible news for you. This is going to go down in flames. And then the problem becomes, well, can you fix that for me? You be my.
Yeah, as if it's fixable like that.
And I'm
Right.
like, I can give you a flash of awareness. I can give you like a little like push of awareness, but me alone sharing your thing to maybe 1 million followers or whatever is not the same as you having a long-term viable strategy for marketing. And a lot of people fall into that trap as well. They're like, I just need one spark of an influencer getting me viral, getting me in front of a bunch of people. I'll sell a bunch of product and I will be off to the races. And I'm like, I have terrible news for you again. You might sell through a bunch of product and then it'll be over. And it is not a viable long-term business strategy to launch a product with a influencer and then expect the rest to just take care of itself. It doesn't work. You have to have a plan after that. And I have this conversation weekly with
You know,
people.
I'm gonna send you a link after this. I wrote this manifesto like I feel like 4 years ago now. And it was really designed for a manifesto internally to Strata and how I thought about it. But it's titled Strata's Product and Media Strategy. And I'll share this with you, and then you can like rip it apart later or totally ignore it. But what I basically said here is kind of like it's basically this conversation, but like in the context of like a software business, and the idea being fundamentally that you almost have to understand that we have to become a media company that happens to deliver a great product. You cannot go the other way. You can't just say, "Oh, I got the greatest product in the world." Like, here's what actually happens for most businesses, and this is kind of like so. Strata's 15 years old. Um, and no disrespect to anybody, but I'll just use this as an example because this is true of like physical therapy businesses, OT businesses as well. Is that you can fail for a million reasons, right? But if you just nail the product, what you're going to end up with, you'll know that you got it right if you nail the product and you get word of mouth distribution. It's very difficult to do because it still relies on you getting at least one customer, and then you deliver something really good, and then all growth comes from that one customer. They talk about it so much. Very
Hmm.
difficult to do, but if you can do that, good for you.
Yeah.
Um, the media side of it, though, you almost have to like overshadow everything. You have to say like, okay, we are willing to put our face on it. We're willing to get noisy about it, and we're going to build an audience. And that audience may hate what we're about to build, or they may absolutely like skewer us publicly, and that's very risky. But like that's how you really build something bigger. And I would argue that um, traditional media has gotten very good at generating huge audiences, but has a very difficult time monetizing them. So, for example, when we think about this, is why I think your business is so powerful, and arguably why we have a lot of similarities with our business as well, is that most pure media businesses, if they succeed, they can create lots of eyeballs, big numbers, whatever the number might be, but then they got to sell ad space. They got to sell, like, and you're constantly trying to fill the ad space, right? And if you're the Super Bowl or you're the NFL, you got no problem selling ad space, you know. But for the rest of us, your Instagram gets big or whatever, like good luck. Now you're doing, if you're lucky, 2 grand a post. That sounds cool, except you got to keep selling. You got to keep finding new customers. Where it gets really interesting is when you take a media business and then bolt a product or a store behind it, like you guys have, or you bolt like a software product or a
Yep.
service like we have.
Course. A lot of
Yeah,
people go the course route.
right,
Yeah.
the course, right? And so if you can start to bolt them together, things get really interesting really fast. But it's one of those flywheels. The trickiest part is how do you start the flywheel? In this case, you're talking about building audience, which I think is a really important topic. And I will say, by the way, I know, like for anybody that's we're going to put links to your background too, but it's easy to like look at Lindsay from the outside and be like QVC. I mean, you made it, but you kind of have to like scroll back. I'm saying this assertively. You can shut me down. I think, what somebody has to do if they're just getting to know you and your business is like go to your YouTube and scroll all the way
All the
back.
way down.
Go all the way back before QVC or anybody paid attention to you. And you realize like it's really everything you're talking about. It's the fundamentals, it's the consistency. And I even when in our first episode, when I was kind of like going back to your history, it was really fascinating because I could see how you were like in hindsight, I could see like how you were iteratively improving production quality, but not like the traditional way. Most people are like, "Oh, let me just get a better camera." There were times where I noticed that you somewhere, man, it was like probably within your first 30 videos, I noticed subtle things like you started putting the product in front of you as opposed to next to you. or well, maybe it's to put it a different way, you would position your body almost behind the product, which was
Yep.
very different than most people. Because I think most people, when they talk about product, it's like my head, and then we're going to talk about this thing back here. And you did it the other way. So all these like little tweaks, I would bet you that until you're smiling, so I think you're agreeing with me. None of those things on its own probably made the tipping point happen, but this is probably the third idea now. Is like, so if the first idea was like consistency, and second idea is like the power law, maybe the third thing to keep in mind with content is it compounds. It does not linearly grow, it compounds over time.
Yes.
And
In
that's the
so many
moat,
ways. It doesn't
right?
just compound in
Not just
effectiveness, it
views.
compounds in
Yeah.
quality. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
compounds in quality, it compounds in your ideas become a little richer. You start to understand a little bit more because you're getting feedback. And that's the thing about content that I think most people forget is that I think the most valuable part of content is the feedback. There are so few places in business where you get instant responses from the
Yep.
people that you want responses from. How hard is it to get Press Ganey surveys for a hospital, or these you're constantly begging people to give you feedback on what it is you're producing. And with content online, you're going to get instant feedback, good, negative, or otherwise. And that feedback becomes fuel for progress and that compounding effort. And so, even if you're not getting millions of views and you're not making a small fortune, the value of learning through content production from the people that you want to serve is insurmountably. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with people recently where I'm like, here's what I can offer you. I can offer you instant access to potential buyers. And by access, I mean they're going to talk to you. How much would you pay to talk to your consumers? A lot. Most people go to big conferences for that, to get hands on, get that face to face. I can do it in a couple of hours online and get the same amount of feedback that you'd spend $15,000-$20,000 going to a conference for.
Right. I mean, I think, I, like, I'm trying to think of how to say this. Tell me if you agree or disagree with this. The concepts we're talking about here not only apply to national level things, like, you're selling products through QVC, like that's a national thing, right? But what we're talking about here also applies to a PT or OT that has a mobile therapy business in Tuscaloosa.
Yes.
Right.
Regional.
It can
Absolutely.
be hyper local, right? Because you don't,
Absolutely.
now tying this idea, now that you've agreed, I would say, now that we tie this, for anybody that's still with us on this, right? It's like, what this really means is, like, going back to that topic of like vanity metrics for just a moment. It's better to go create content, or at least get in front of 100 people within 20 miles of where you're based in Tuscaloosa, than to have 20,000 viewers all across the country. I mean, don't get me wrong, everybody wants to have 20,000. Everybody's ego loves the idea of 20,000.
And not to mention, I think so if you're a regional provider and you're creating content that does have national reach, the fascinating thing that I find is just how often I will find out that somebody in Quebec found my content, realized where I was from, and did a shout out to a friend who lives in Michigan. Was like, "Hey, are you following this chick? She lives in your state." And all of a sudden, I'm getting regional speaking opportunities at local universities because of a follower who wasn't even in our country. And that's wild.
I think we had Tony Maritato on the show here a couple times, and I remember at one point he talked about how, so he creates a lot of content, and his practice is in Ohio. I think he specifically focuses on like knee replacements, PT after that. And so we were talking about this similar topic, and I think somehow I asked him the question of like, has your practice seen any revenue from this? And he said, and I'll find the article, the episode, but he said something like, it's like he didn't even hesitate. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, I've had patients drive from Texas because they found our content online, or my content online, and they really just wanted me to help them feel better. Um,
There's
so
that
yeah,
trust.
to your point. Well, see, and that's the thing, right? It's like, this is like the super nerdy. I'll send you this doc later, but um, when I think about like the nerdy way of talking about why media and content are important, I said it's two bullet points. I said, number one, it's about creating reciprocity and partnership by giving away value.
Mhm.
And then number two, boosting brand through media that engenders trust.
Yep,
And I think
absolutely.
all the topics we're talking about here apply whether you're talking about an Instagram account, a TikTok account, or just speaking at your local chamber of commerce. Like whatever
Mhm.
it is, like it doesn't the people always get hung up. I don't get the same question as you, but I get similar ones where they're like, "Hey, should I do TikTok or should I do YouTube?" And it's like, I don't know. Let's
Do.
worry about making something interesting first, and then let's think about the distribution of it, and then the numbers will tell you everything you need to know.
Yep. Just do it. And nobody wants to hear that. I know I get a lot of pushback. And I just don't want to. This is not my thing. You're comfortable in front of the camera. You do it. And I'm like, I have really bad news for you. You're going to have to figure that part out. Whether that means you use a strategy where you do a lot of B-roll footage, where it's you, but it's not you talking to the camera. It's you making a cup of coffee with a poignant voiceover. Or, there's a lot of ways we can make content that features us without having to be so
Yeah.
I'm very playful and right in the camera, but that's me. That's authentically me. So do what's authentically you, and I promise you'll find a way to make it work.
You're so much kinder than me, because usually, like, when somebody starts pushing back on that, like, let's just say, like, "Yeah, well, you're way kinder than me." Because when that part comes up, when the objections come up, it's like, "Look, you asked me the question.
Yeah,
I told you
obviously
the
you're thinking
answer, and
about
now
it.
you're telling me you don't wanna do it. How about you just not worry about what I wanna hear, and you just stop lying to yourself? You clearly don't wanna do this, and that's okay. Just say that."
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.